In last week's episode, we talked about the visual coherence of Nintendo games, the Nintendo aesthetic. Let's see what you had to say. Hey, Mark Brown, very nice to see you here. For anybody who doesn't know Mark Brown, he does Game Maker's Toolkit. He had the top comment for a very good reason. One, he's Mark Brown. And two, it's a really good comment. Mark points out that one of the reasons there might be such a strong cohesion between Nintendo games is the way that they design them, is the way that the mechanics come together. That what they do is they decide what the game mechanics are going to be, Mark says, and then figures out what kinds of things make sense to skin them, and uses Splatoon as an example, and that this could possibly provide an opportunity to create a more cohesive set of game experiences than going at it from the other way around, which is, yeah, it's a great point. Relatedly, my good friend John on the subreddit, who brings up Mark Brown, talks about this as game feel, comes up with a name for this idea that, like, across Nintendo games, there is a strong, not just visual coherence, not just design coherence, but there is a feel to the games that is perhaps what the base level cause is, and that all of these other elements that cohere sort of are built upon that. And I think that's, yeah, it's a really great point. My good friend John also weighs in on the comment response question, which is YouTube told us that it would be better for our main episodes if we were to upload them on Wednesday or Thursday and then upload these videos on Fridays, and to put a day or two between them. Says they're, you know, not a huge fan. I'm not gonna lie, they're great for our production schedule because it gives us another day or two to work on these videos. But yeah, we're still sort of coming around to whether or not the effects are good. Maybe we'll go back to YouTube and find out. But yeah, keep letting us know how you feel about this, whether or not, you know, you can see yourself getting used to it, or whether or not it's just bad idea. Zaruian and a couple other people brought up a really good point that actually, as soon as we uploaded the video and I got to see it afresh, you know, through the eyes of new audiences, I thought, garbage. We left that apart, which is that, you know, Nintendo hasn't always occupied this place that I've given it of always looking a little older, or, you know, having rendering technology stuck to a degree in the past, and that it wasn't until we got to compare it to things like the PlayStation or the Xbox that you could really say that about Nintendo. And so it's hard, as we did, to talk about it having a history of always looking slightly older, when in fact for a number of years, you know, it was the preeminent, or in, you know, some conceptions, the only console choice. And that, you know, showing examples of talking about this idea and showing examples from the Super Nintendo is, you know, maybe not quite accurate, or doesn't have the nuance that we would, you know, like to aspire to. I also think that it's a more interesting story, that it's more interesting that Nintendo wasn't always in this position, but now in the current console market, in the current media landscape, you know, it says a lot about the pace of consumer technology and video games, that Nintendo occupies this position now where it maybe didn't, you know, in its past. So yeah, great point, well received. Spuds Larsson, this is a great question, and I want to know an answer. As a sound nerd, you know, I'm sure that there is, you know, there's a lot to be said about the technology that Nintendo used in the Game Boy, and why the Game Boy specifically is the thing that inspired the chiptune movement. I mean, you know, it was a widely available piece of technology, so that's, you know, first step accomplished. But yeah, I mean, I wonder, like, is there something about the way Nintendo games even now sound, or the way the technology plays back that sound, that just makes them sound more crisp, is the word that Morgan and I decided. We talked about this. We were like, it is true. It is true that Nintendo games sound really good, and there is a crispness to them. I wonder if it is, yeah. Is it the converters? Is it the chips? Is it the fact that it's paired with bright colors and it's it just does something to your brain? This is a great question. Nice. No answer. Noxabellus makes a really great point that Nintendo might not in fact be searching to create a coherent set of games. They might not be looking for an aesthetic. They might not be looking for visual coherence, but what they might be doing is just coming at it from a specific design philosophy that then, as an effect, unites all of these games in some way. And the design philosophy they talk about is sort of one that's related to an episode we made a while back about controlling versus being your avatar, and this idea that if you make your character, or the characters on screen, you know, whoever you sort of have to identify with, more simply, if you put them together in such a way that there is not a huge amount of detail, then they become, it's more likely then maybe that the player will feel some connection with them. And that a lot of the Nintendo design choices seem to hinge on this idea that, you know, you can feel more connected with these characters if they are more either cartoonish or more simple, so that you can read into them more and the games don't tell you as much about, you know, what the deal is, what the situation is, what their character is like. You know, I think this goes a long way with the idea, the paired idea that, you know, Link doesn't talk a whole lot, and so maybe that makes him harder to get to know, but it's easier for you to feel like you are him. I think this is a great point. Ian Boswell, who is a former Sega game developer, provides some really interesting context for the design perspective on this whole thing, and I just want to point this out to say, thanks Ian for sharing your experience. This is a really enlightening comment. You should read this if you haven't. Links to this one and all the others in the doobly-doo. Chase Stanton and a couple other people pointed out that Persona 5 is maybe a strange example to have in the front part of the episode, where we're talking about the visual distinction between Nintendo games and other console or PC games, because Persona 5 is, you know, not a Nintendo game, but does have a very particular visual quality about it that, you know, has some of the things around it that Nintendo is well known for. And so we have accidentally picked out a game that says about other consoles what we're trying to say with Nintendo. What I will say is this: I think actually, weirdly, it proves our point, because if Persona looks like a Nintendo game and we're saying that Persona is going to really stand the test of time and is going to look really well, then I think that that means that, you know, it has seized upon something that Nintendo has figured out across its library, and has successfully done that, and so says, you know, like yes, these are the qualities that can go into a game that will then make them age in this particular way. And while it is not necessarily the sole property of Nintendo, it does have a sort of association with Nintendo. Shawn Wesley brings up a related point that I want to provide some clarification on, which is that while Nintendo doesn't seem to, you know, rarely deviates from its low poly count, sort of more simple lighting, high contrast colors, like bright palette, that doesn't necessarily mean that that design style isn't found in other places in the game's ecosystem on other consoles or on the PC. Shawn points out Sly Cooper, Ratchet and Clank, Yooka-Laylee, which I've never heard of, but I'm definitely gonna play because that's spelled in a really, really fun way. And yeah, all over the place in indie games. So to say that, you know, that these things are the territory of Nintendo would be inaccurate, but I do think that there is still an association that exists with these visual styles with Nintendo, and I think that's the thing that we're trying to get at. Not that these styles are only found, you know, on particular systems, but that because particular systems have been a home to these styles, there has been a relationship that has developed between them, and, you know, that means something. So yeah. Slipguard from the subreddit writes a really great comment comparing what you could imagine as Nintendo's design ethos to other games. Makes a really good comparison to From Software, the people who make the Dark Souls games. But I just want to point out one thing, which is the comparison that they make, saying that Nintendo games, more than anything, come from an emotions-first design perspective, which is maybe we're getting back to Mark Brown's point from the beginning of this comment response, that they're looking at mechanics and game feel and how people feel playing a game before they're concerned about the look of something or the story, and that everything else arises out of that. But I think this is just another and interesting way to look at this, that, you know, what Nintendo games, which, right, yeah, we still haven't really hit on what exactly that means. But what Nintendo games maybe go for is this emotions first thing, which, as Slipguard points out, cuts across generations. And so I think that this is maybe a really great unification for a lot of the points that we made in the episode, that it's something that that it kind of doesn't matter how it looks, that the aesthetic is kind of just whatever you need to get by, but that there's something more important at the base of it.